The Conservatives, the Bloc and the NDP, as he mentioned, all saying they will bring down the government, which would trigger a snap election. Here's Conservative leader Pierre Poilievre on Friday.
The Prime Minister has lost the confidence of 60 of his own MPs, and somehow he's clinging to power. We have a guy here who has lost control of everything, and yet he clings to power. This cannot go on.
Pierre Poilievre also sent a letter to the Governor-General calling on her to recall Parliament before the start of the next sitting. That is not something she can do. It's actually up to the Speaker to recall MPs. But how are opposition parties positioning themselves ahead of Parliament's return next month? Let's bring in our Sunday Scrum. Catherine Lévesque is a parliamentary reporter for the National Post in Ottawa. Robert Benzie is the Queen's Park Bureau Chief for the Toronto Star. He's, of course, in Toronto. And Gary Mason, a columnist with the Globe and Mail in Vancouver. I don't even know where to start. It's been such a week. Let's start with a little bit of the opposition parties and their posturing. I'll start with that clip of Pierre Poilievre. Catherine, obviously what he's calling for can't happen. It is not the right process for this to happen. But what do you make of his messaging and what he was actually trying to do on Friday?
Absolutely. I think he had a good week until Friday. I think, what happened on Friday is that Jagmeet Singh came out with this letter, and then Pierre Poilievre was trying to insert himself in the conversation and kind of, pounced on the opportunity to, call Mr. Singh's bluff, which is fair, but also to try to find a solution to recall Parliament as soon as possible. But as you mentioned, he can't do that. The Speaker can only recall Parliament. The Governor-General can only, answer a call to prorogue Parliament or, call an election. So, that process just simply cannot happen. And so I think what we're going to be seeing moving forward is Pierre Poilievre probably getting a no or no answer from the Governor-General and saying that she is partisan and, does not want to, respect the will of Parliament with three opposition parties that do not have confidence in the government right now.
Yeah, in fact, the Governor-General cannot take advice from the opposition leader. Her minister is the Prime Minister, and he's the person that gives her advice on how to proceed. So, the whole thing is moot from the get-go, Rob, but as Catherine points out, that probably wasn't the point. The point was to try and take some of the narrative or to ratchet up pressure or whatever.
Yeah, he's doing what opposition leaders have to do and insert himself into a story. Yeah. Now, the interesting thing to me, Rosie, is Mr. Singh said that he would, he wrote his letter saying he will vote down the government sooner rather than later. But remember, they ripped up their confidence and supply agreement, and since they ripped up the confidence and supply agreement, which, by the way, no one's actually seen the physical paper if it was ripped up. But anyway, since then, I think they've voted to keep the government afloat a dozen times. So. I believe it when I see it. Do you know what I mean? When the House comes back in January, will things have changed a little bit? I don't know. I still think that Mr. Trudeau may surprise us and take a walk in the snow, but I don't know. He's just he's an enigmatic character in his own way. For someone who has really literally been famous to Canadians from the day he was born, he's still really not that known, if you know what I mean. Like, we don't really have a good read on what's next. So I think Mr. Singh did on Friday what he had to do, as did Mr. Poilievre and Mr. Blanchet, the same thing. So there's a lot of posturing, but again, we are in this kind of weird limbo for the next few weeks. And if the Prime Minister goes to the Governor-General and asks for prorogation and she grants it to him, which is not necessarily a given, then we're in a different kind of a world too.
Yeah, but that change on Friday, Gary, it sort of does make it complicated for the Prime Minister as he starts to reflect on what he wants to do, because now an election is inevitable. It sounds like it's inevitable. I take Rob's point. I'm not sure I believe it either, but it sounds like it's inevitable this spring.
Yeah, absolutely. In 2008, when the opposition parties sort of coalesced and they intended to defeat Stephen Harper, he goes and gets, the Governor-General to prorogue Parliament and comes back. And of course, he doesn't get defeated. So, we don't know for sure, what's going to happen. Although I think it would be terrible for Jagmeet Singh to sort of, go back on his word. I mean, it would put him in a terrible position with the public. And, anytime you're propping up a really, really unpopular government, it doesn't help your cause. It's not helping the NDP whatsoever. I think, Rosie, I think there's going to be a resolution on this like fairly soon. I think because if there's going to be a leadership race, it has to happen. The wheels of that have to start turning like right away. So he would have to go to the Governor General early next month and beg her to prorogue Parliament so their leadership race could be held. And then that has to happen fairly quickly. She's not going to probably grant a very long prorogue of Parliament if she does at all. So I think we're going to see a lot of clarity on this whole issue fairly soon, Rosie.
Catherine, if the Governor General is asked to prorogue Parliament for the Liberals to have a leadership race, if we get to that point, there's lots of ifs before that. Is that something that she would do necessarily, or that she would have to do in order to allow the Liberal Party to get their act together?
I mean, there's a lot of ifs, right? A lot of hypotheticals right now. Yeah. I think ultimately, look, I don't know if prorogation will actually be something that the government will be asking, just for the simple reason that we're going to have a Trump presidency in a matter of weeks. In less than a month, we'll know if we're faced with tariffs or not. And I think as things stand right now, the government is solely focused on that. So, I understand all the speculation around the Prime Minister, but I think he will have to address Canadians soon as to what will happen with his own leadership, given the increasing pressure now from the Ontario Liberal Caucus. But one thing is for sure, and Nathaniel Erskine-Smith, newly sworn minister, actually said that in the meeting, is that the Prime Minister will have to stay to deal with the tariffs to try to avoid them, and any other hypotheticals as to whether or not he should stay on as leader, whether there should be a leadership race, I think will come after that.
Oh, not confident at all. No, I think it's time for him to go.
I'm still going to vote for him. I'm still confident because better than voting for the devil that you don't know.
Unfortunately, I think we all need to realize when our time is up, and I think his time is up.
Canadians also obviously reflecting on what's next for Justin Trudeau after a chaotic week in Ottawa following Chrystia Freeland's resignation. So how seriously is the Prime Minister considering stepping down? Let's bring back our Sunday Scrum, Catherine, Rob and Gary. Maybe I'll start with you on this, Gary. So as we reported, as Rob's paper, the Toronto Star reported, there was this call yesterday with the Ontario caucus. Oddly, Chrystia Freeland was on the call but didn't talk. But she did hear 50 or so of her colleagues suggest that they think Justin Trudeau should go. That seems like a pretty big number, even if they're not saying it publicly.
Oh, yeah. Rosie, I mean, the die is cast on that front. I mean, I don't think there's any doubt that probably 75%, maybe 80% of the caucus doesn't support Justin Trudeau. He's lost the support of his caucus. I mean, that's quite clear. I mean, his last gambit, his last hope was installing Mark Carney in as finance minister. That was going to be a reset that he might be able to sort of launch a last-ditch effort to regain the trust of Canadians. That failed spectacularly. He's run out of options, Rosie. He's done as a prime minister. He just cannot continue, especially given the stakes that you've mentioned already. With the United States and the threats they're facing us. You can't face those threats with a lame duck leader, and he is a lame duck leader. I mean, in the polls, he's lower than a snake's belly. I mean, you can't get any lower. So, I mean, he's done, Rosie.
It's interesting, Rob, because when I talk to people around the Prime Minister, the very thing that we're talking about, the Donald Trump factor, is the factor that is actually giving him pause about staying. Yeah. That's the piece that he seems legitimately worried about and thinks that he can legitimately is best suited to confront. But give me your take, especially given those news events from yesterday.
Yeah, I mean, my colleague Althea Raj has a terrific piece in the Star today about that meeting of the Ontario caucus. It's chaired by MP Michael Cotto, who I know. He was a former cabinet minister in the Ontario legislature. Very able guy. Runs a good caucus meeting, I gather. And 51 people were on the Zoom call. and it was it was like Festivus. It was like the airing of grievances, and I think that's a problem. I mean, I understand that the Prime Minister thinks that only he can deal with Donald Trump, and maybe he's right in the sense that he has dealt with Trump in the past. Trump knows him. He was at the dinner at Mar-a-Lago. But you know what? Dominic LeBlanc was also there. Dominic LeBlanc would be a pretty able interim leader if need be. He is someone well regarded by the premiers. He's well regarded by members of his caucus. He's the only New Brunswick MP who's actually backing the Prime Minister, which is extraordinary. Everyone else in the caucus in New Brunswick wants Trudeau to go. So it is, I mean, Gary's right. It feels like end of days. But again, there isn't a mechanism for the party to remove him. Remember, unlike the Conservatives, the Liberals didn't sign on to Michael Chong's Reform Act, so they can't defenestrate their leader. Regicide is difficult in that party, more difficult than it is in Ask Aaron O'Toole, than it is in the Conservative Party. So I think. I think we are. It feels like the die is cast, as Gary said, but I'm not sure that Mr. Trudeau is going to go along with that. Although when your Ontario caucus is saying it's time to go, that is huge. That's half of their full caucus. The Ontario caucus. Yeah,
that might be a game changer. But I agree, Kathleen. It is very hard to not that I want to get inside Justin Trudeau's head, but it's very hard to it is very hard to understand where he is based on the people that you talk to, and I can understand that. I can understand how it's hard to come to a decision, but it's also hard to understand how you could be faced with what happened yesterday on top of everything else, and still wonder if there's a path forward.
Absolutely. I think, there is no mechanism, sure, but I think, we've been seeing the public pressure increase. I mean, it's a drip of MPs rather, who have been saying that either they won't run again or that they simply do not have confidence in him anymore. So the situation right now is untenable. At the same time, I mean, I think, Justin Trudeau is in it for the fight of his life. I mean, that's what we were hearing until this week, at least. It's really personal for him. He really wants to fight against Pierre Poilievre, and he made great sacrifices. I mean, in a recent book about Justin Trudeau, some people close to him were even saying that, he actually sacrificed his marriage to be able to fight in the next election. So this is very personal for him. The stakes are very high, but at the same time, I mean, if he stays, I don't know what kind of caucus he's going to have. I think at this point, a majority of MPs are either telling him to go or are telling him to reflect, which, we can interpret as, take your time, think about it, but you should go in the end. So I don't know how he can stay. But, again, this situation might change in a matter of weeks. Already we've been hearing from interest groups that we should stop talking about politics and people's political futures and actually focus on the tariffs ahead.
Well, we're talking a little bit about both on this show, just so those interest groups know. We're taking both. We can talk about both. I still can't. This is probably me processing the week that was too. I can't really get over how badly this was all handled, right? And certainly Chrystia Freeland has her role to play in it as well, in terms of sticking the knife in. But I have to wonder that if he hadn't had that phone call with Chrystia Freeland the Friday before, maybe this wouldn't, none of the ramping up of getting rid of him wouldn't have happened this quickly, and we wouldn't be in this place. Like, I wonder if that is really the thing that will do him in, because he could have maybe held on a little longer, and to understand that what you've done is self-inflicted, I think is even worse, Gary, than if someone was coming to get you on their own.
I agree with you, Rosie. I mean, I think that really was like the tipping point. I mean, it was handled so poorly. We still don't know, the whole Mark Carney side of this. I'm waiting for Bob Fife to break the code on that one. But, why did he back out? Like, what happened there? I mean,
I don't think he was ever in, is my understanding. That's the piece that's even kind of nuttier.
Which is crazy. I mean, if he told her in that Zoom call that he was going to be the next, I mean, why would he tell her that if Carney was never in? I mean, it seems bizarre. I mean, but anyway, as you say, it is just it's kind of forced a decision that was needed to happen anyway. I think, and if he had stayed on, it's a disaster for the Liberal Party. Everybody in the Liberal Party knows it too. I mean, if they're being honest, over their turkey dinner, they will say that, they'll be praying that this guy comes to his senses and leaves and announces a leadership contest, or they pick an interim leader to go into an election. I don't know what the mechanism will be, but something has to happen, Rosie.
Last minute to you, Rob.
Yeah, I think that's right. I mean, at the end of the day, Mr. Trudeau is the elephant in the room. If the Liberals got rid of him as their leader and announced a pause in the carbon tax increase on April 1st, I think they would see their polls go up. Now, they don't look to me for advice, and it's not my job to give them advice, but it's staring everyone in the face. And you talk to enough people in politics, everyone's saying the same thing behind the scenes as we're now hearing, in things like Althea's story and the reporting that you guys are doing, Rosie, at CBC. So it's pretty obvious to everyone except, it seems, the Prime Minister and maybe his inner circle. And that's not a good when things are that tightly, you're that insular and you're that insulated from reality, it starts to be a little bit like the Caine Mutiny or something, it's just it's not sustainable, as Katrine said.
The decision that I made is based on the intention that I always had, and that was to enter politics, not worrying about the next election or the partisan nature of this job, but in order to serve Canadians.
I understand there's going to be a short runway. I'm not blind to that. But if I can make a small difference, if I can make a big difference, I want to make the biggest difference that I can. That's why I joined politics in the first place.
That was Canada's new Housing Minister, Nathaniel Erskine-Smith, and the new Minister of Official Languages and Associate Public Safety Minister, Rachel Bendayan. They were asked about the potential short lifespan of this cabinet and their support for the Prime Minister. So what message does the shuffle send? Let's bring back our Sunday Scrum. Catherine Lévesque, a parliamentary reporter for the National Post in Ottawa. Robert Benzie is the Queen's Park Bureau Chief for the Toronto Star. And Gary Mason, a columnist for the Globe and Mail, and he's in Vancouver. Okay, I'm going to start with the shuffle because it is interesting, I think, and sends some messages, and then we can talk about, potential leadership people. Obviously, what precipitated all of this was a cabinet shuffle that was going to look vastly different, and then Chrystia Freeland resigned, and things had to be done to sort of settle the government and stabilize it. Rob, I'll start with you. What did any of this say to you, and do you think it's meaningful and is that we should take anything from it?
I mean, we should take from it, Rosie, that there's panic in the government because there is. And I think look, I guess on one level you cannot blame career backbenchers like Nate Erskine-Smith or David McGuinty from accepting cabinet posts, and important ones, frankly, and on issues that they're both passionate about. David McGuinty will be a public safety minister. He, of course, is an expert on those issues, having chaired that committee, the parliamentary committee. Erskine-Smith is a passionate crusader for housing, and I think for him to be housing minister is not unhelpful. The problem is, as he acknowledged, it's a short runway. So is this the kind of job that you're a cabinet minister for a few weeks and then the government falls and who knows what happens? I don't know, but I guess it's one of these situations. It reminds me a little bit of in the movie Rebel Without a Cause, Dennis Hopper and James Dean are getting in these cars to drive off a cliff, and James Dean says, "Why are we doing this?" And Dennis Hopper says, we got to do something." And then, of course, Dennis Hopper gets killed. So this is kind of how that feels. There's a little bit of this weird kind of, I don't know. It's very surreal. But I mean, they had to shuffle. They had all these vacancies. You had so many people doing so many things. But yeah, it's been a week. I can't believe, actually, Rosie, that it hasn't even been a week since Chrystia Freeland resigned. I was at the Council of the Federation meeting here in Toronto when that came through, and that seems like a month or a year ago.
Yeah, you're preaching to the choir there, my friend. That's for sure. Catherine, what did you make of it? It was interesting to see some people, like, as Rob points out, David McGuinty finally get into cabinet, right? Like that was kind of interesting. Or Nate Erskine-Smith, who wasn't even going to run again. Like there were some moments like that.
Oh, absolutely. I don't think it was their original plan, for sure.
No.
I mean, certainly the cabinet shuffle was supposed to happen on Tuesday or Wednesday, and it happened on Friday. I think, some people got some calls at the last minute, certainly. But, what I thought was interesting was, well, someone like David McGuinty, not surprised that he would make it to cabinet. He has some experience as a negotiator. At the same time, he also represents what is supposed to be a safe riding in Ottawa South, maybe not so safe anymore, right? Same thing for Rachel Bendayan. I mean, she was a parliamentary secretary to Ms. Freeland, also someone that I saw and I wasn't very surprised to see in the shuffle. But I mean, she's a Montrealer, an Anglo-Montrealer, a member of the Jewish community, something. But I think there were also some surprises. For instance, I thought like Cody Bloy, for instance, chair of the Atlantic Liberal Caucus, would maybe be in. Instead, we had Darren Fisher. And, I say that with no disrespect to Mr. Fisher, but I was surprised by certain names that were there for sure. Another surprise that I will say I had, it was Nate Erskine-Smith, who was openly questioning whether or not he should accept that position. I mean, he was talking to, it seems, pretty much everybody this week, even at the Liberal holiday party, asking, well, should I accept this? And that is very, very unusual. But again, that is, Mr. Erskine-Smith. He's not, someone who's a loyalist. I think it was certainly a surprising choice, but also surprising that he would go out and ask everyone about his political future.
Yeah, I actually would qualify it as the most important cabinet shuffle Justin Trudeau has ever done, maybe other than the first one out of the gate, Gary. Not because it is so important in terms of how long it's going to last, but because it had to try and not upset people. And that is a hard job on a good day as Prime Minister.
Yeah, and I guess the jury is out, Rosie, on whether he accomplished that or not. Yeah. I would say that he didn't really accomplish much by it. I mean, it's probably going to be one of the most short-lived executive councils in federal political history in this country. I just don't expect it to last very long. And let's face it, everybody is already starting to look down the road at potential leadership candidates, and are there people in this cabinet who have been given positions that will help elevate them in a leadership race? And you look at Dominic LeBlanc, the finance minister, probably the lead guy in any talks between Canada and the United States. So I think the cabinet shuffle has to be looked more through that lens than in terms of the lens of something that's really a group that's really going to accomplish a great deal. They've got a very, very short runway, as Erskine-Smith said, and the expectations are very, very low.
Thank you for that good segue to Dominic LeBlanc, because we did hear from him about his support for the Prime Minister. I'm going to play that little clip.
Would you like the opportunity in the future to lead this country if you were given the chance?
So full points for trying with that question. If the Prime Minister has the full support of his cabinet, then why would we contemplate what happens after he decides to leave?
Dominic LeBlanc, the new finance minister and minister of intergovernmental affairs, one of Justin Trudeau's very good friends, Rob. But his name would be out there, I think. Chrystia Freeland, I mean, she is not speaking publicly, but she's been making phone calls. It's quite obvious that this was, yes, a slap in the face to her, certainly, and she experienced that. But then she quickly sort of got back up on her feet and got strategic about what she could do with this opportunity. So give me a sense of how you see that playing out. Whether the Prime Minister leaves or not, these people are going to start to activate.
Yeah, totally. And Melanie Joly is another one, the Foreign Affairs Minister, who has a pretty good organization behind the scenes already. I think though, Chrystia Freeland has an interesting position right now in a sense that yes, she's working the phones. She probably now has the safest Liberal seat in Toronto in University of Rosedale because she is the anti-Trudeau. I guess her riding, remember, borders St. Paul's, and it was her chief of staff, Leslie Church, who ran and lost to Don Stewart, the Conservative, in June, which was kind of the began this summer of crisis that we're still kind of in, even though it's technically winter. But yeah, I think LeBlanc is an interesting one to me. He really is the happy warrior. I mean, what you played that clip earlier, Rosie, of Doug Ford. Doug Ford genuinely likes Dominic LeBlanc. He's been to his cottage in New Brunswick. LeBlanc's been to Ford's home here in Toronto. The joke is LeBlanc told Ford once that he used to babysit Justin Trudeau when they were kids, because he's 4 or 5 years older than the Prime Minister, and their dads worked together. And Doug Ford said to Dominic LeBlanc, he said, "Dom, you still do babysit the Prime Minister." So it's interesting. He really is the minister of everything. And again, the one guy who seems to be able to turn the temperature down on so many fires that are burning. He really is a capable guy, but you can't expect him to do everything. It's ridiculous.
No. There was an interesting tidbit in Althea's piece, Catherine, which we also had heard yesterday, and that was that Patty Hajdu on that call yesterday apparently said, no, I assume she knew Chrystia Freeland was on the call, said that Chrystia Freeland basically did a lot of damage to the party by making the decision she made, and compared it to Jody Wilson-Raybould. And I wonder what we should read into that, if there are people who are already starting to criticize Ms. Freeland, as she tried very hard this week to put distance between herself and the Prime Minister.
Yeah, I will say I was surprised to read that this morning, because Patty Hajdu, right after Ms. Freeland resigned, was one of the people who said, "I respect her decision" publicly. So, she seemed pretty sympathetic to, what Ms. Freeland had done. But look, I mean, I think a few days later, people have differing views. I mean, there are a number of Liberal MPs now who are asking for Ms. Freeland to step in as Liberal leader to, take Justin Trudeau's place. Yeah. I mean, obviously, there will be a backlash, right? There will be criticism, because it seems pretty clear right now that even though I think, Ms. Freeland wanted to stay in cabinet, and that was her intention, to stay on as finance minister, she has an opportunity. And, I think this opportunity is very clear that she is taking her distances from Justin Trudeau. She can be seen as a blue Liberal. She, has been pretty open about, her team has been pretty open about the fact that she did not agree with the Prime Minister's office on a number of issues, including the fact that the government needs to be fiscally responsible, especially in the face of Trump tariffs, those $250 checks, et cetera. So, look, I think, other contenders out there might be a little bit jealous that Ms. Freeland now has the leeway to criticize the government. I'm told she's going to be an activist MP, so I'm excited to see what that will look like if we get there once Parliament resumes.
I'm sure she would like everyone to think she's a blue Liberal. I think Conservatives would take some issue with that. Gary, last word to you on this.
Well, I mean, I think that there's a lot of things that are, have to be considered here. First of all, if Parliament is prorogued for a leadership convention, it's probably not going to be a 3-month leadership convention. It's going to have to be shrunken. So there's some people that probably have a head start already in a leadership contest that's a lot shorter than it normally would be. And I guess the two big questions are, for people who are electing a new Liberal leader, if it comes to that, is, who's best to deal with Donald Trump? That's one thought. And who's best to kind of win the country 4 years from now? Because, I mean, let's face it, the reality is they're not likely to win the next election. So whoever's the leader has to rebuild the party and rebuild trust in the Liberal Party across the country, which I think should be a bigger priority than who's best to deal with Donald Trump, because the next Liberal leader is not going to have to deal with Donald Trump. It's going to be Pierre Poilievre's problem, more than likely. So I think that, there's a lot of considerations there, that people have.
But first we have to figure out what the Prime Minister is doing, and if he will one day tell us. But first, I want us all to take a holiday. So I wish you Merry Christmas and a Happy New Year, and we'll talk in the new year. Hopefully not before. We'll try not to call. Thank you all so much.
Thank you,
Rosie.
Take good care, guys. Thank you so much.